Stop that. So we're not going to quit.
Okay, no twitching.
Jerry back in the day used to shake, rattle, and roll. He doesn't quit. So, all right.
Oh, funny. Okay, we are out there. YouTube, we are recording. Just remember that is our microphone and speaker.
Okay, I have 10 o'clock. I would like to call the Isabella County Board of Commissioners Finance and Administration Committee meeting, the hybrid meeting, which we call in-person electronic, to order. Okay, let's go call her. Before we get started, I just called it to order. I'd like to add, I think we did, just before this meeting started, we had a quick little blurb discussion, if you will. And we're going to try something a little different today and see if it works out as we go forward. And that's going to be approval of the agenda as item number 2. And we'll move everything down. On approval of the agenda, we'll put that in today in case any commissioners here in the meeting wants to add something. And I'm going to make it so they can just add it. I'm not going to have board approval. I'm going to have commissioner approval. I think we're just going to do a very formal until this gets out of hand by me adding too much stuff. And what I'd like to add, and again, this is just recently came up, and again, I just read it in the paper this week, and I thought, hey, maybe we should just address it and see what the thoughts are. I see that we're getting so, and we'll do it when we get to the discussion. And I like to put it under, we can have it under item 7 for that, or it would be item, I guess it'd be item 8, right? If I move everything down one.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to do marijuana discussion, marijuana funds discussion. I guess that's how I like to term it, and we'll go from there. So that's, and I'll bring it, we'll discuss it at that time. So, any other commissioners have anything they'd like to discuss? Okay, we'll do the agenda that way. So 2 would be approval of the agenda, move everything down, and that would make 8, I guess, the marijuana discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana funds discussion, I'm gonna put it, and then 9 will be adjourned. Okay, call to the public. Okay. Hey, next up, it said the revised Isabella County Financial Policy number 14. Nicole, I guess it's you're up.
Yes, sir. So it wasn't that long ago, 2018, that this board approved a new procurement policy. It was quite a rewrite from what had been on the books previously. And for the most part, everything's been working really well with the new procurement policy. But there's one area in the thresholds for procurement. And in our thresholds, there's different ways you can procure a thing, but the thresholds really say who's got the authority and how do you have to go about the procurement when they're in these ranges. Something under $2,500 of cost, then the department head, as long as it's budgeted for, can basically go out, research what's available, and buy what they want, if you will, in that anything under 2,500 range. And then once you get above 2,500 to 5,000, then that's where we require 3 quotes. In the policy, it said they could be written quotes, they could be verbal quotes. The department head just kind of keeps track of what's, their notes, what the research they've done, the information they've gotten, and what would justify their decision. Then in the 2018 policy, anything over $5,000 required a formal request for proposals or request for bid to be released. In our RFP and RFB templates are about 14 pages. It's just for the template, and then we build in what the procurement is and who's in charge of it, that type of thing. But it's a real voluminous amount of material that we expect back from a vendor. We expect a work plan from them of how they're going to plan out getting this work done. Well, think about snowplow bids, right? Those vendors have to succumb, if you will, to that template. What is their work plan going to look like for, it's kind of what we've seen this do is really limit the amount of vendors who will respond to our procurements, especially in the range of about 5,000 to 25,000. They're busy, they don't need the work. it's not worth their time, I believe, to go through all that. So we're finding on a lot of procurements, specifically, we had a procurement at Commission on Aging for some asphalt work on the parking lot. We had no one supply a bid. You'll remember the Chippewa River erosion and canoe launch project, and we put that out for bid last fall. One vendor, although those are certainly of a higher dollar amount, we had one vendor wasn't responsive. The next time we really had to work with the vendors to make sure they understood the requirements. So in those smaller purchases, it's just been burdensome to have to follow the RFP process for those. So the new policy that's recommended in the packet basically adds a new level so that anything up from 5,000 to 25,000 would require 3 written quotes. It would require, uniform specifications to be used to get those quotes. It would require the procurement to be listed on the bid page of our county website and, to contact the department head for that. So there will be like a public announcement that those bids are out there, which is nice. And then go to anything above 25,000 would require that formal RFP process. So that's really the difference that's being proposed in the purchasing policy. And this was something that was brought to me from department heads. This has been talked about at the department head meetings. And I've received some feedback from department heads and electeds on what to build in. The piece about publishing it on the website came from that department meeting it was just a good conversation, good idea to do it. Are there any questions about the change or why?
I think it's as long as it still has some type of oversight and monitoring. If you can open it up again, we want to try. I think this board's policy has always been that we can do something local. We want to do something local, and if this can open it up to more local bids from a functionary status, if that was holding it back just because of the 14-page thing, or I'm quoting you. I don't know if it was 14, 12, 10, 8, 7, whatever.
14.
But if that, and that would certainly, be a detriment to someone. Because, so if we can do that and keep everything local as much as possible. So going up for the 3 bids, weighing the odds with that, selling and control department heads, so responsible to you, okay? Not necessarily like officials are responsible to you, but you're also monitoring what they're doing. So I think it's, from my opinion, it stays within board's overall philosophy, fiscal responsibility, yet community emphasis.
Yes.
So that would be my thought. I think it's a good idea. It's always subject to review and it's always subject to change. So I think that's why we have these. These are, you want to say that they're rules, but they can be guidelines. And so I don't see a problem with it. What about you, gentlemen?
I think it's time to change it. I mean, we're looking at an inflationary period, so $3 don't buy quite as much anymore. And I have experience with the Stabilization Township Playground Grant Program. Part of the funds is for concrete work. Well, the concrete work was going to come in over $5,000, and the DNR hasn't made this change yet. And it was such a headache that I wouldn't go out for closed bids for the concrete work. So I just reduced the amount of concrete work, got the approval from the DNR to reduce the scope of the project, and got it in budget. But I mean, it just creates headaches for that small amount of dollars.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, it's hard to get work done right now anyway. So if we can simplify the process, it still has to go through a bid process. It's just a little less formal process and doesn't go through administration.
And the overall is that the overall requirement in the purchasing policy is that the monies be in the budget and board approved, and then these things fall into place. If it wasn't something that was budgeted for, it's going to come back to the board for approval. So I think it's important to keep that in mind too.
I do like that whoever's going to go out still has to have some basic specifications so that whoever's providing the price quote is that balance there, quotes coming in, so you know you're gonna get a good product.
Yes.
Okay, Jerry, you wanna make the motion?
Yeah, I'll move that we consider adopting revised Isabella County Financial Management Policy number 410, procurement policy, replace the current policy and take effect immediately upon adoption. So we move that to the work session.
Yep, I'll support that. Further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. That will move forward to the work session. Next up, the budget amendment 2022-04.
Yeah, so get used to seeing these folks on a regular basis. This is a sizable one, and it's a compilation of a lot of things going on in fiscal 2022. Some of them you have seen before you, and you'll recognize them. Some of them might be new, and we can talk through them. But I'm just going to walk you through from revenues down through expenditures and explain what all is involved with this particular budget amendment. You in your budget resolution, you give the administrator, you delegate to the administrator controller the ability to perform budget amendments between funds and in an amount that doesn't, when I do budget amendments, they're always under 50,000, 25,000 if it has to do with equipment. And it's always a give and take or a net zero, right? Where we might be lowering revenue, but we're also lowering an expense. And so your overall budget would not grow. But anytime we take out a new grant and the revenues are going to be higher than what you've approved, and we take on that grant, so the expenditures are going to be there too. Anytime we raise that budget up from what you've adopted, it's this board that needs to do that. I have no authority to do that. And so some of these budget amendments serve to do that. I will say, all told, as we work through this, it's almost $100,000 that this is adding back into our budget, if you will. It ends up about $100,000 to the good. So it's kind of amazing to believe that, but we've got some good news in here. So it starts out with a CESF, Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funds grant for the PA in the amount of $19,074. So we are increasing the revenues by that because we didn't anticipate getting that grant, but we got it. And that was for some extra temporary assistance to help them with their backlog cases. So when we get to the expenditures down below, you'll see an expense of $19,074 for that COVID-19 CESF grant, fiscal 22. Same kind of thing for that trial court, the next one. And the revenue is going up $4,023, and below we have that first expense line is the corresponding expense. We're going to spend $4,023 for the trial court coronavirus expenses. Also, we're the new PA's CESF fiscal year 21 grant. We didn't anticipate that extra, so that's built into revenues. And again, those funds and expenditures down below are in the PA's office expenditures. The next revenue we're adding is $3,000 for tax roll processing in the equalization department. And they process a lot of assessment notices and tax bills for the townships. That goes through a third party. We pay the third party, and then the townships reimburse us. So at the budget time, we thought that'd be about $10,000. So we built in 10,000 revenue, 10,000 expense. Now we know that's going to be about 13. So we're just building up that extra revenue. And then down below, you'll see where we're building up $3,000 in the extra expense. Sale of fixed assets looks like a positive, adding over 19,000, but that is just over 16,000 of that was a totaled patrol car. So not all good news in there, but we were, able to get salvage value and insurance payout of that. So that comes back as a bonus, if you will, because it wasn't revenues that we budgeted for. The next revenue, we are increasing $5,000 in interest income. Good to see that is ticking back up. You'll see that's in the treasurer's department, the 101253. And my understanding is the accountant let you know, and you're aware that we were doing that. The next revenue, we remember seeing district court bond forfeitures increase when we talked about what are driving some of these revenues up. And there was a large bond that was forfeited, and so that's already occurred. We didn't budget for it, but we're increasing the revenues by 10,000 in that line item because it's already here. Same thing going back to the treasurer's office when the switch was made to take animal control and place it under the sheriff. Culture shift changed and everybody started to come to the treasurer's department to buy their dog license. And when we budgeted, we usually in the budget, we say the treasurer's office will take care of this and animal control basically handles this, but we do see that by and large, they're coming to the treasurer's office for those. So he's already over budget in terms of that revenue. So we're just basically claiming that overage, but at the same time, you can't say, oh, congratulations, you're doing well and stop there. You have to reduce the revenues that you thought you were going to get in animal control, which are clearly being transferred over here now, right? So that next line, you'll see that revenue we're reducing is $15,000. We're reducing the budget for dog license sales in animal control. We're not going to get that. So you can see overall, there's a decrease to what we think we're going to get selling dog licenses, but it's just a function of where it's coming in. This next revenue also in the treasurer's department is the local community stabilization authority. And this is for personal property tax replacement. Back in 2012-ish, 2013, 2014 in there when personal property tax reform was happening in the state, remember at the time they took all these small taxpayers that had $80,000 of true cash value in their equipment, and they basically took them off their books and excused them and said, you don't have to pay that anymore. A lot of change in personal property tax. Luckily, those wind turbines were carved out of that. But at the time, the personal property tax that the state took off the table and said, okay, counties, you're not going to receive this anymore. They created this local community stabilization authority. They took some money off of the state use tax and said, we're gonna fill the hole with that. And that's what the stabilization authority has done since that time. You had a baseline of our personal property was here and now it's here. And usually that detriment caused a decrease in personal property revenue, so the state would fill that gap. Here in Isabella, our baseline personal property tax is here, but because of the turbines, now we get this much personal property tax. So we really didn't think that the state was going to be reimbursing us anything, but they reimbursed us $38,000. We get to keep it, and we didn't budget for it. So long explanation to that, but that's a bonus of $38,000 to the budget. This next, in the sheriff's office, you'll see Region 6 grant for Gray Key, an amount of just over $26,000 in revenue, and you'll see down below a corresponding just over $26,000 in expenses. This was a regional grant that we're going to be fiduciary on and run through our budget. We didn't anticipate it, so again, we're going to increase our expenses and increase our revenues, but they offset in net zero. Next one also has to do with the sheriff's office. This is Village of Lake Isabella contract for law enforcement services. Again, something else that's come up since budget time, $45,000 of revenues is expected from them. And then you'll see the expenditures total $45,000, but they're broken out between salaries, FICA, retirement, workers' comp, those things that Lake Isabella would actually be reimbursing us for. That last revenue line up there at the top on this page is adding $98,827 to our fund balance. But really what's happening there, remember when we adopted the current budget, we said we're going to use just over $300,000 in fund balance. So what this will mean is we're going to use closer to $200,000 in fund balance, right? It's not really adding, it's just saying, okay, we're going to budget to spend less, if you will. I'm going to continue down the expenditure page on the expenditures. It is a 2-pager, and we've got revenues and expenditures on the next page, but it's going to be easier to talk about those revenues when we get to that. So if we work our way down the expenditures on page 1, We've talked about that first one being a CESF grant for trial courts, just increasing that expense because we've got that revenue. That next line, admin salaries, that's decreasing due to not having a deputy administrator in place for the rest of this fiscal year. Admin PTO payouts is actually an increase to expenditures that the PTO payouts that were made prior in this fiscal year had not been budgeted for in admin. So we need to cover that payout. And then we did not budget enough for what our property and liability insurance premiums came to be. So we are increasing that by $17,000. These next two expenditures are a wash. We're increasing one and decreasing another. We had a new employee that takes the opt-out of insurance. So they're getting a cash in lieu of insurance, if you will, that we didn't budget for. Clearly, where are we going to get the monies from that? Well, that department's health insurance, because clearly we're not going to spend as much in health insurance with that department if the new employee is opted out and we've budgeted for an employee to have that. So that's what's going on there. The next department, you'll see an increase in expenditures because we've had some overtime in that department and a decrease in salaries because we've had an employee in that department out on leave. So as that employee is out, we're saving that salary. We had to give the work to another employee in that department. So again, that's kind of a wash. Next one you'll see is that $3,000 increase in expense for the tax roll processing. And then grouping those next ones together are all for that prosecuting attorney CESF grant and covering a little bit of overages. One different thing we've done in the current budget year at the admin department in general fund has always absorbed the cost of pre-employment background checks, regardless of what department it was for. So say Mr. Nepor wanted to hire a new inspector and inspections, we do the background check, general fund was paying for that, rightly so. Inspections fund should pay for that. We run background checks on commission on aging employees, rightly so. Commission on Aging Fund should be paying for that. So one thing we've done in the current budget is add line items to everyone's departments for pre-employment background checks. No budget, right? We didn't know this at budget time. So some of these increase in expenditures you'll see is just adding money into those departments. Didn't know it at budget time, but the general fund departments were covering those expenses that have happened so far with this budget amendment to bring them out of the negative in those line items. And that's happening. You see the prosecuting attorney has one of those line items. Treasurer has one of those line items. Community development, one of those line items. So we are down to facilities, repair, and maintenance on the dental wing. We're adding $1,500 into that budget line just because there's been more need for repairs that they've needed those this year. We didn't anticipate it in the budget, so we're building a little more. A large decrease in expenditures. You'll see out of the sheriff's department, just over 106,000 savings. As he has indicated, he's not filling that new lieutenant position for the road deputy that was approved in this budget. It's not happening. It's quite a savings now and going forward. These next ones. Again, sheriff had a new employee that's now taking the opt-out of insurance, so we're just increasing that cash in lieu line. Sheriff's got some new equipment building in here that wasn't budgeted for. This is for in-car computers. He's got 2 more units that actually need the new computers, and then if we actually, they're a little over 5,000, I think, a piece, or just under 5,000 a piece. If we get those 2 new ones, it'll be under 10,000, but if he gets 3 new ones, he can replace one, and then the animal control officer will actually now have a computer in his vehicle. Since he's under the sheriff's direction now, that really helps in terms of report writing and consistency. So I would recommend we get the 3, and we're building that in as an expense. Next, you'll see that Gray Key grant, that regional grant expenditure that ties above. And then those Lake Isabella contract expenses for salary that tie to the amounts above. One expense that we are covering, it's quite large, corrections is already over in their overtime budget. So this budget amendment does serve to send $35,000 more to that corrections overtime line. We know that they've had some staffing reduction there, and so I'm sure that's what's driving that, but we will work on that going forward in the current year. Another one, corrections, vacation, and sick payouts. We've added a little more to that because they are already over budget in the current year. So that brings us to page number 2. Again, revenues are at the top, and these are now no longer general fund revenues. On this page 2, you see their parks revenues, their commission on aging revenues. They are material recovery revenues and delinquent tax fund. And we're decreasing the fund balance in each of those funds because, as you'll see below, you can tie that, see the pre-employment background checks, the $300 expense below, that ties, Parks Fund is going to cover that, general fund isn't. The pre-employment background checks for Commission on Aging is going to cover. Material recovery is going to cover. For delinquent tax revolving fund, those are attorney fees that were held until the current year. Those have already been paid, but the board needs to approve that budget amendment to lift up the amount of revenues being fund balance and the amount of expenditures happening in that fund. So I just wanted to point out that those funds are covering those expenditures. Back to general fund, we've just got that small pre-employment background check increase of $150 for community development department. Decrease of $18,000 in salaries for animal control. We just had the animal control secretary position retire, and sheriff is absorbing those duties into the police clerk's duties, as I understand it. So that's the savings for the remainder of the year for that position. Animal control equipment repairs and maintenance. We're a little over budget for contracted services and equipment and repairs out at animal shelter, really, and that's where that's getting built into. I'm also recommending $35,000 be built into the budget for building repairs and maintenance at animal control for 2 capital projects that were not budgeted at budget time. One we brought to Human Resources and Public Works Committee on Tuesday. This came out of the negotiations with HATS last fall on that new contract. At the time that those negotiations were happening, HATS brought to the table what's happening with the parking lot at the shelter. We had kind of abandoned the project. They brought to the table that they would pay 50% of the project if we went forward with it. So that's actually a proposal that you'll see next Tuesday at full board. HR committee did move that forward. I let them know that the half that would be Isabella County's responsibility is about $28,000, and I let them know that was built into this budget amendment. They trusted me with that. The other balance from the 28 to the 35 is because we've recently been inspected by Department of Agriculture and need to repaint some of the back dog kennel floors. Needs to be an epoxy type paint. It's about a $7,000 expense. So with the 28 and the 7, those 2 projects, that's where I came up with the $35,000. Speaking of the negotiations with HATS last fall, you approved that new contract with them with a $20,000 annual increase. In the budget, we had budgeted for a $15,000 increase. So that extra $5,000 in contract services that you see for animal control is to cover the remainder of the increase to the HATS contract. Woo! We are, the last one that I haven't spoke to is the drains, public benefit, county drain at large. You know, with the Mission Creek improvements, the Little Tobacco improvements, those were major drain projects. So for the county's portion of the drain at large, just like everybody's assessment on those drains, our county portion is going up too. And this is a continuing thing for a while, right? Sometimes those drop off, but those big ones, it's a 20-year thing. So we're building just over $20,000 into that drain alarms. That's already hit, that's already there. We need to cover that overage. So lots of good news in there, some bad news, but when you shake it all out, it's almost $100,000, like I said, to the good, where we're sitting right now. Still not able to have no use of fund balance, but we're moving in the right direction this year. And I just think it's important. We meet every Monday morning. I meet with the two accountants now, and we go through our revenue and expenditure report for general funds and some of our major funds. And we just identify where are we going off the tracks budget wise. And to me, it's a lot easier for all of us if we regularly bring these forward and stay within our budget than to come September and scurry or wonder. It's just nice to keep it on track all year long. Apologize for the long explanations, but I felt it was important that you know what each of these are for.
Gentlemen, questions?
I was gonna say amen.
And that's why I didn't write a staff report, because it would have taken too
Yeah,
long and been
yeah.
really, I think this is a better way.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the explanation.
I have a couple questions.
Sir,
Just first, just clarification, and when you did your responsibilities, or not responsibilities, but for the background checks, did you do a corresponding increase to the revenue of the administration side? You said you were doing them in administration, now they're going out to the other, should there then be a savings on administration side?
hopefully there will be, but I don't know that expense was anticipated at budget time.
Okay,
So in the general fund ones, yes,
so you're showing an increase in expenses, but on the revenue to the departments, but on the administration side, because you don't think that was in there, that's why we're not seeing the difference.
correct.
Okay, so you had that absorbed in, now it's, okay.
Yes, if we go through the year and I see, oh, we've got this extra cushion in admin expense line, that, trust me, we'll need that to cover someone else's overages or our own overages, in another line item. So I think that's, to your point, I think that's something we just watch as we go along. And these overages have already happened. So you've got overspending in a line item with $0 budgeted. And to me, it's better to get those covered. But yes, you're right. We might have some savings in admin down the line.
Just, and on this sheet here, page 2, if we could have that spelled out, maybe that the unreserved fund balances were addressed, not from the general fund, because to look at that, I didn't realize until you brought it out, that Parks Commission and AG recycling and DTR, that's what those came from. It looks, to me, it just looks like unreserved fund balance out of the general fund.
I
So-
think we can
I
add
mean, you're going off. the
Parks
last-
fund balance.
Yeah, you're going off. these
COA. Yeah, but that doesn't
That-
mean a lot.
That's
to you,
that's the
right?
old way we used to do finance administration stuff. It drove me absolutely nuts, because I didn't know. I had to figure out my little cheat sheet codes with all those. So if we could somehow list it up with the commissioners that sit on this committee, that'd be nice. So they would at least get general understanding. And my
That's a good
last,
idea.
and my last statement, as far as revenue goes, and this is not a good topic subject, but it's going to tie in a little bit to my addition is, in our last board meeting, I believe it was a 350 resolution, and had the employee portion of the healthcare that we could not pay for. Okay, is that going to be reflected on an increase in our budget side, because it was budgeted for, yet we're not paying? So should that be an increase on the increase side?
What a great question. So our costs are still the same for insurance. The employees are paying more. So where that happens, so how this happens, when it happens through the payroll, every time a payroll hits, the payroll function obviously takes the employee contribution out of their paycheck, feeds it to what we call an internal service fund. And it takes all the departments, everything we budgeted for insurance, it runs that journal entry. So it takes from admin, it takes from community development, it takes from treasurer, and it feeds into that internal service fund as we budgeted. So I think if the employee portion is covering more, then I think what budget-wise, what we could see towards the end of the year is a reduction in all those department budgets, savings, a general fund savings, if you will, and in parks and in
Because in
COA.
theory,
and-
weren't we
so there'll be some
$81,000 short? So where's the
Yeah.
81,000 appearing in our budget? I would think it would have to show as an increase back into our budget. Because that was the whole purpose of that, is we were capped. We can't
Mhm.
go, but we were going over to pay for that. So we have to shrink it back down. So you gotta account for those dollars, I think, somewhere.
Yes. And now, please remember, it's not all going to be general fund too, right? Obviously, people in Parks Fund have insurance. People, there's employees that are
Well,
charged to.
Again, you gotta
that have
count,
insurance.
whether it's in administrative, or where it's at.
We'll show it in a budget amendment going
On the
forward. is your
revenue
point.
side, yeah, because it's gonna be a revenue some, but again, I don't like the term. It's not a good topic I want to bring up.
It won't be revenue, it'll be less expense, right?
Okay.
It'll be on this bottom
Gotcha,
portion.
right,
but
not
it'll
revenue,
be-
less
but we
expense.
could, yeah, but
Yeah.
we could either then reduce the amount of fund balance we're using, or we could use it to increase other expense line
Okay.
items, right? Mhm. But to your point, you're right, it should be included in a
But you're gonna
budget
have to show it
amendment.
somewhere, so it's gonna appear. That's the only thing I have, and that's for you to decide, me just to say, hey, I wrote budget here, and that's all.
No, I love it. It's very transparent to
So,
do that too, right?
Again, not a good topic, so I don't wanna. Well, I have nothing further, so I'll make a motion that we consider approving the budget amendment 2022-04 for fiscal year 2022 second quarter budget adjustments, and authorize the board chair to sign the same.
I'll support that.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion?
One thing is, I think this brings us in compliance with the state Uniform Budget and Accounting Act, but also gives us more information, a clearer picture on all our finances that we need to know to make a decision on other issues. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Hearing and seeing none, will all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. We are going forward. Next up, bonding from municipal employees retirement system or MERS pension unfunded accrued liability UAL discussion.
So shortly after the first of the year, our chairman had, asked me about the likelihood of bonding for our pension unfunded accrued liability. And so I reached out to MERS to see what needed to happen. And we needed to put a team together of bond counsel, financial advisor, and an underwriter because of the way those type of bonds are placed. And the first thing that had to happen was reaching out to MERS to do an updated actuarial evaluation of where we're at. And that came back in mid-February. I sent it out to the finance team, and basically they put it into this big machine that says, whether or not it makes sense for you to go forward. I don't understand everything involved with that, but there was a magic number, and they said if you're on this or above, it's a go. Well, we were right on the edge of whether it made sense for us to do this. And the logic is if interest rates were increasing going forward, and it really wouldn't make sense for us to bond at this time. And as we all know, that's the direction interest rates are going right now. So they pretty much came back and said, it's probably not going to work for you right now. And part of the reason is the law doesn't allow you to kick the can down the road with it anymore. We've got a closed amortization. We've got a certain liability has to be paid off within that period. We'll always have that normal cost going forward, but long story short, it didn't make sense for us to bond right now. But through that process, the report we got back from MERS was a little alarming, where they had our required annual contributions, our annual payments that we're going to be making to MERS. They were a bit higher than what we saw when MERS came in 2018, with that ballpark projection, and we signed on for that smoothing, and we closed that amortization at 15 years. So I had asked MERS to kind of come and explain that, and Tony Regenovich, our regional MERS rep, came Tuesday and met here with myself. Commissioner Jelezinski was present, as was Treasurer Pickens, and I'm glad that they were here because it was good information. I know I learned a lot. Not a lot of surprises. If we had bonded 20 years ago when we closed our DB, that would bode well for us. If we had bonded maybe 10 years ago when it was suggested again by Treasurer Pickens, it would have boded well for us. What we found out from our rep is, yeah, the financial team's right. Bonding's not probably what we're looking at right now. He is going to go back and run numbers because there was some question about, medical care facility is in those numbers with us in the actuary, and he wanted to make sure that those were taken out, and we were really looking at our situation. Really, the discussion with Tony came out to the best thing we could do for us right now in our unfunded liability is if we had an extra certain amount of money to send to MERS to put towards the liability, that would be the best thing really that we can do right now. And if we want to come up with an amount, we can give that to MERS and they can put it in their machine and see where that affects us going forward, how it affects us going forward. But right now we're basically waiting for MERS for this next report to see what does it look like standalone. He had said that recent report that MERS sent us in response to me asking for a new one, sounds like it was different than our annual valuation that we had. We had some surplus, actuary surplus in here he talked about because of the way that they smooth things out. We've had a recent good year, but they smooth out the good just like they smooth out the bad. And so from what I understood, what he said is maybe our situation is a little better than that report showed because they smooth out that stuff. And so we don't get the full impact of the good that we've had in the last year or so. So I don't know if there's any questions about pension bonding.
The only thing that I have, it really doesn't have to do with this, but several, I think it was probably 2 finance administration meetings ago. Treasurer Pickens, who's in the audience today, brought up certain ways that you can take advantage of monies and to gain some interest hits on that. Is that something maybe we always use the term hybrid? Okay, we use the term hybrid meaning for in-person electronic. Is there something we can hybrid instead of bonding? Maybe we look at doing that type of thing. You pay more. You mentioned it before. You pay more into it, and then you capture the investment dollars. And maybe we can look at that. If this bonding doesn't come, is there some way that we can use our monies better?
And I think that's exactly what he's going to come back and tell us, but we need to tell him how much would you have available that you're willing to.
No, yeah, right. You don't want to, because with the unknowns, what if we have another COVID situation? What if you have another whatever? You don't know. You don't want to. So that's a great idea. Let's put 20% of our fund balance into that, because you may have to spend 25% of the next disaster hits. You just don't know. So yeah, I would.
But we do know that MERS investments are performing better than ours, so our money is going to go more.
One of the things is, the problem is,
Steve, you can come up here if you want. That way the public can see your face. They got to see mine. They have to, your improvements.
so I think part of the things that Tony was trying to explain to us is they do evaluations yearly. Okay, now the ideas of putting more money down there by bonding or by taking out a fund balance or whatever, go down there, it affects you immediately, but not to the nature of, because we're smoothing out over so many years. So it's always good for us to lower our liabilities as much as we can. But with the way we're at right now at $20 million in debt, it's not going to make that net effect for the next 3, 4, 5 years on us. I think you mentioned after the 5-year thing that it'll drop off immensely, but we still got to get a handle on that $20 million debt because because that grew $5 million in 1 year. If you look at your audit report that you received, it was 15 million. And the current one that they just got, not even a full year, was 20 million. So, the ideas before, when we were looking at bonding and stuff, it was a little more advantageous for us because of the rates and things. But, one of the things that I questioned that he said was, it's such a close vote. You've got bonding costs and all that stuff that's got to play into this because you got to hire all those expensive attorneys.
They charge way more than I do.
Well, I know, but, and you got to have counsel, and you got to have all that stuff that you need bonding. So there's a cost in there that's quite a big cost. Do those kind of things. And then the benefits of whatever the rates are. And usually when the interest rates go down, the bonding rates go up. Vice versa. So if the interest rates are on a rise, I would think that the bonding rates would be dropping more. And he kind of did not say that. So I think we're in a trend where interest rates are going to go up. Inflationary period here, they're going to go up. The feds are going to adjust to that as well. So in that case, you don't want to be in the bond market buying. You want to be in the bond market to use their bonds. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here Tuesday too.
The only other thing that was brought up, I know we talked about the possibility of state funds being put forward to support these legacy costs. And there was a pool of money for municipalities that were at 60% or lower. And pool of money for other municipalities. Well, apparently the counties aren't eligible, period, because they're just not eligible. But apparently there's also a change in the legislation now where all the monies are directed to those municipalities with a lower vested funded 60% or less. So we lose out.
Do a better job than some who get messed up. Basically, we talked about that before. So anything else, Shannon, on this? Okay, thank you for that
More to come.
discussion. Okay, next up, invoice list discussion. Let's take them. We got. Three. Gary, see anything?
No, I don't have any questions on any of them.
Tobin, what about yourself?
Nope.
I didn't have anything either, so we'll just, if something comes up between now and then, or if another board member at our business meeting or work session or whatever we call it, has anything to bring up. So.
Absolutely.
All right, next up, this is me. I asked to be added on this agenda item just for discussion today. I recently read in the paper that we are getting, the county is going to be receiving some sort of revenue in regards to the taxes that are collected, or the fees or whatever, with recreational marijuana. My understanding is correct.
Yes,
That's-
yes, this is based on the businesses.
Right.
within
Do we
our
have a dollar
jurisdiction.
amount that we're
We
anticipating?
do. Actually, I was just pulling that up. It's just over 112,000. I can work to get you the exact
No, I
numbers,
don't
but it
either.
was 56,000 and some change for each business that we had in our jurisdiction by a certain date. So
Okay.
our numbers put just about.
Now
Just north of
that's for the licensing, or that's for the taxes. I know last year we received something for each entity that got a license in the county, but I thought this one was from the taxes that were at that dollar.
I thought it was still the licensing dollars.
Well, regardless, we'll work with 112,000.
112,000.
If we get more money, great, but that's our working number. Okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to go into that other discussion.
Okay.
Where I'm going with that is, even though I think this came from the recreational side, there is a large component, i.e. we even passed back in whatever year earlier, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. Okay, so there is a component on the medical side with marijuana. Okay, we got $112,000 to work with. I would suggest that maybe the board look into using part of that to help reimburse all our employees, because I don't think we can segregate some employees, of a dollar amount to help with medical expenses that they may incur, i.e. extra monies that they would pay possibly. I'll give you an example. Monies that they may pay extra for the healthcare that wasn't anticipated. Okay. Certain things like that. But you couldn't. You could also use it for employees who didn't take the healthcare. They could use it for whatever they want.
Sure.
And I would think that would be a one-time hit. And we reevaluate it after 1 year if that was a good way. I would suggest, because marijuana, again, this came from recreational dollars, but there is a medical component to it. And it's right out there statutorily with the medical marijuana. So I would think that would be something that we could do to spend those dollars. That would be just up for discussion for this movement for every time.
And if it's the desire of the board, then this is a mechanism to do that, right? Because like you said, we would increase revenues.
And we could offer the employees that, and they could choose to either, again, use it for what they want, offset healthcare premiums, extra additionals on their paychecks, so to say, or something else. That would be my thought. That's all I have. That was it. Yeah. Okay, that's all I have to say on that, and we'll move forward.
Excellent.
Anything before, actually, maybe we should add we always have a commissioner announcement. Maybe we should add another line item down the road, like commissioner announcements or something like that. Anything you guys have to add? Anything you want to-
I just want to add that early in the year, we talked about some strategic planning sessions, and I just want to keep that in everybody's, keep that in the back of your mind and think about when we could do that.
Now, would that be, would you want to do that local? Would you want to do that like on a retreat basis? I don't want to do an overnight thing. Or anything like that.
So to the pleasure of the board, I know that this board in the past have done some successful off-site type of retreats.
We did it, I think the last
do
one.
that
I
locally
think the
too.
only one that I can remember doing was the Commission on Aging building when we sat there. That's about the only one I recall. We might have had one in here. But that's just.
Maybe we could get another cut.
What?
Another cut?
That is-
It's a retreat up by Farwell, the other side of Farwell, that CMU owns.
We had Parks and Recreation, strategic planning workshops at Nethercutt. It's a nice relaxing environment. And just the idea of doing it, I think it gives us more of a chance to have input on these major decisions and to bring up things that maybe aren't on the radar, to get them on the radar. Doing it on an annual basis just makes us stronger.
Anything else? Okay, I call the chair at 10:52. Oh, yes. On the public. Anything I forgot to ask earlier on the virtual.
I had my eye open. There is no one at this time.
Okay, thank you. That was Jessica Drosowitz.
Mr. Pickens.
I did, sorry.
Oh, no.
Earlier, I didn't speak up earlier on things, but we're making all the adjustments back and forth to line items and different departments and things. We want to make sure that we include, when we get a rebate from the unemployment taxes, we get that every year we get a rebate, insurance rebates.
Workers' comp. Yep.
Workers' comp, I'm sorry, workers' comp,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
We need to make sure that those budgeted funds get their portion of that back. If we're gonna take, it's just, we're gonna get down to the nitpicky accounting,
Gotcha.
which sounds like we're doing it, which I'm not opposed to, but I do think we need to stay on both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. Any more public? Once, twice? Okay, at call of the chair, 10:54, we are adjourned.
Hi, Steve.
I didn't want to say anything before, but yeah. Hello and goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for being here.